I'm an ESOL teacher with Jewish Vocational Service in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, which is a part of Boston. And I've been teaching since 2009, teaching ESOL since 2009. Before we get started, Cynthia and I just want to do a little acknowledgement that, excuse me, Cynthia and I are both white women who work in a field that, at least in Massachusetts, is mostly made up of white teachers teaching students of color. We don't claim to be experts on racism or experts on whatever racial dynamics may be at play where you all work. I know there's people from all over the country here, but we do believe that people of color cannot and should not have to battle racism alone. And so we do this work, however imperfect we may be at it, because we see it as our responsibility as white people to do whatever we can to address these issues as well. So we're the co-presenters, but we're also bringing with us 3 other voices from the field, 2 students, Matias Rodriguez and Dalsant Lavoie, who are both at work at the moment. So you will see via video, and also Kamala Red from New York City, who has, all 3 of whom we have worked with and have offered to share some of their wisdom and experiences in this work. So before we get started with more intros, I'm going to pass it to Megan for a little note on tech support.
Hi, everybody. For the purpose of today's webinar, we're asking that you put any technical questions into the Q&A and any comments into the chat box. You can access the chat box by going to the bottom of your screen and clicking the little chat bubble icon. I also want to take this time to remind you that your chat box settings should be set to all panelists and attendees. That way, if you have any comments or reactions or responses, or even questions for the panelists regarding the content of today's webinar, everybody can see it, not just the panelists. If you have any technical questions, you can reach out to the Q&A, or you can email me at Megan_Morris@worlded.org, or you can email Ebony, who is also our technical assistant for today, at Ebony_Vandross@worlded.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
And so as a warm-up, we want to say that this webinar stands on the shoulders of many people who have helped get us here to be able to offer this offering to you. And we want to start by honoring some of those people. So today, for me, I would like to honor Ramses Teon, John Iftikhar, Valerie Jimenez, and Chris Messinger, who are friends who at different parts of my life have taught me how to do anti-racist work while also reminding me to love myself. And that has been really important for me. So in the chat, if you could put the people who you are thinking about as we start to spend this time together, we can share that together. So we're going to just take a minute for people to answer these questions. Who do you want to honor with this work? Or who do you have in mind when you take on this work?
Thank you I see some people putting in the chat that the people that they are honoring as they embark on this work. And then I also want to just pause and notice that, as somebody has let us know in the chat, that the Chauvin verdict has been reached and it's going to be issued in about 25 minutes. So as we are honoring the people that we are thinking about when we do this work, we can bring George Floyd into the room and notice that our attention might be pulled because we are very concerned about this verdict and this whole process. And I just want to be real with everybody. We are going to keep plowing ahead and doing the work of this webinar, but we would also are completely open to, if there is news that's coming out and you would like to share it in the chat, we would like to pause and acknowledge that. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. And thank you for just reminding us that this is the context that we're operating in right now. It's hard, And thank you for being here to keep looking at it together. Many beautiful comments in the chat, and it's really nice to kind of think of all these people being in here with us as we get started on this process today. Thank you for everybody's contributions. I want to share our agenda with you, just a quick sketch of what to expect today. We're going to start with a student reflection from Matias Rodriguez. We have a video from him from 5 years ago, and then another one that's more current. It's from last night. And we thought that was a good way to get the webinar started. We are then going to address the why of bringing up race and equity in the classroom, and I'm going to do that part. We're going to do a little interactive piece where you get to say a little bit about what makes you nervous and what makes you excited. Then Riva is going to share a video that she has made with her student, Dulcin Lavoie, and she's going to talk about the how of talking about race in the classroom. Then we're going to send you all on a field trip to look at some Google slides that we have created that we think will help teach about race and racial equity in the classroom. And then we have some resources to share with you. So I'm going to kick us off by introducing Matias. So Matias Rodriguez is somebody that I met about 5 years ago. He was a student at the El Rio Learning Center in Tucson, Arizona. And he participated on the editorial board of the Talking About Race issue of the Change Agent. And that's how I met him. He also submitted a piece to that issue and also to our subsequent issue on transportation. He wrote a great piece about the class rallying to get more bus lines and shelter for their community. And he joined me on the webinar that I did in 2016 to talk a little bit about what it was like addressing race in his adult ed classroom. And I want to start this by sharing a clip from that 2016 webinar. I have the link to the whole webinar here. And so when you get the slides, you could listen to the whole webinar if you want. But the part that I'm going to share now is really just 2 minutes of Matias from 2016 talking about his experience reading this book in class, Warriors Don't Cry, and being in a small group with a white student who was not so happy about having to read that book. So here is the clip.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. So I just want to, hello everyone. My name is Matias Rodriguez. I just want to share a story, a discussion that we had in class. When I was in class, we had a discussion on race, and we were reading a book, Warriors Don't Cry by Malva Patillo. Some students liked it, some thought it was a waste of time. There was a conflict between me and another student in class. He couldn't relate to the book, and he was a white male, and he couldn't see other people's perspectives. He didn't see the point of the book. We were talking about segregation, and Hazel, my teacher, asked us, how do we see this in today's world? He got kind of snarky, and he was obnoxious, but I asked him if he had never experienced this, and he wasn't really coming from our community. Still, I treated him with respect. As I said in the Change Agent, talking about race is risky. So I told them, see, it is risky to talk about this. I realized that the individual hadn't been exposed to too much of this kind of analysis. I realized even in my own past, I was thinking about it too much. I knew it, and I felt numb to it. I didn't want to judge him, and I learned from him that he would come around and he would be exposed to this more of this information. So teachers and students need to still, gain more skills from this and hold these hard conversations.
So that was Matias talking, fairly immediately after having that experience in class. And I'm really open to hearing your comments and anxious to hear what your thoughts are about that piece. And now I want to share with you what he says 5 years later, after sort of 5 years outside of distance from that class, and having had lots of experiences and having to sort of integrate what he learned in the class into some of the things that are happening in his regular life. Here he is now for about 6 or 7 minutes sharing his thoughts about that. And when we did this recording last night, the only place he could find that was quiet enough, away from his kids and things and other distractions, was in his garage. So, hi, Matias. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your reflections on the class that you took 5 years ago and what's been happening since then.
Okay, so yeah, like looking back at that class 5 years ago, I'm glad I had the chance to have those hard conversations because I've been, ever since then, I've been confronting racism. And one thing that I've learned, it's not really people's values that are messed up. Sometimes they're just afraid or just plain ignorant. I notice if you could be patient with these people, it takes time, but they can be changed. For example, I have a friend that he is half Navajo and half white. He didn't grow up around African Americans. He used to make racist jokes and rude comments. One day I just got tired of him, so I just kind of threw it back at him and asked him, why do you feel that that's okay to say things like that? I asked him if he's ever been discriminated against, or how would he feel if someone talked to his kid that way or his family member that way. I know his values, and I know he wouldn't want to be taunted or made fun of. But I've learned racism. He learned racism from his white dad, and I think I got him to think about it more. I noticed he stopped saying stuff like that around me, so maybe I might have struck a nerve. Racism is a systemic issue, and a lot of people don't see that. It's in our workforce, our grocery stores, our homes, our schools. So we just all need to be able to talk about it and listen to people and do everything in our power to end racism. When I came back, when I went back to get my GED, it was just there was a couple reasons why, but one of them was the main reason so I could teach my kids, because I was getting third grade, fourth grade math work and English work, and it was hard for me to teach my kids. So, but anyways, I just wanted to help them do better in school. So before I started working on my GED, I used to live in an apartment complex where there was a lot of African refugees, and I would go to work every day as a landscaper. And I would look at these, these refugees that were just staying home all day, and I would just think to myself, what a bunch of freeloaders just hanging out here all day, getting all these benefits. Well, I can't even get health insurance or any kind of benefit. And through my ABE classes, I've learned more about these refugees and how they escape from war and being tortured and all this bad stuff going on. And so my understandings grew, and I had been numb, but in these classes helped wake me up. There was a lot of stuff I didn't know, and I'm glad to learn more about. Now I try to make sure my kids understand too, and just keep educating and talking about it has really helped to understand racism. it's been 5 years since I took that class, and I feel even more strongly that we need to keep educating about racism. Just the other day, all these these white guys that work at my job started giving me just like, you know, making these little comments and kind of trying to start trouble. But they said it must be nice to be the brown guy in charge while us white guys are out breaking our backs. I didn't say anything, but in my head, I thought, you have no idea what it took for me to get here. You know, and like in my field of work, in the horticultural world, you know, we have to go through all these trainings and all these certifications and do all these seminars on how to, you know, learn how to work with diverse groups. And there's just a lot, you know, that they just don't know what it takes. And it's not just a brown guy or a black person, a white guy. It takes anybody just to work their way up into a good position, a work position. So one way, you know, I got to where I'm at is, you know, through the Learning Center, which, you know, helped me with my GED. But not only that, I participated in the Leadership Council, and I learned a lot from that experience. One last word, this work is really hard. We got to keep doing what we can to heal the wounds, and just keep, you know, doing the work and just keep educating, so we could fight racism. And that's all what I got. And just want to thank Cynthia and everybody for having me again, and thanks for listening. And I hope this helps out in your classrooms and in your teachings. Thank you.
Yeah. What did people think about that? I'd like to see what's in the chat. If I saw people, there were some questions. I see an amen. Yeah, Kathy Budway. Kathy may have been one of his teachers or mentors there in Tucson. In our conversations, he actually said more about how getting his GED was good. It was important, but really the most important part of his work there was being on the Leadership Council. So I thought that was pretty instructive, you know, for his leadership in all the things that he's done in his life. You know, being able to be part of the Leadership Council was huge. So yes, Gwen is appreciating his honesty and candor. They don't know what I've had to do to get here. Yes, thank you, Carrie. I liked his use of healing wounds. There's lots of comments here. I hope, you know, when you can take time to scroll through them, and also when you do get the recording, you'll be able to, you know, be more leisurely with all the chat. I've noticed that there's just such great content in the chat. So thanks everybody for your contributions. I thought, you know, for me, it was interesting to hear his affirmation of how hard it is to talk about race in the classroom, but also how important it is. And that there was a model for him there. Like when he had the bad experience, or I shouldn't say bad, challenging experience with his fellow white student, that there was a practice there to stay in there for a hard conversation. And there was support for him from his teachers and from other people in the class. So he wasn't just going it alone. And that experience, it sounds like it shaped him a little bit. You know, it made him feel like it's possible to have these conversations. So, well, thanks everybody for listening to Matias. And Matias, I just want to appreciate him for taking time out of his really busy life to talk to me and work with me and do the recording of this video. It was really a pleasure to work with him back 5 years ago, and then also now. So we wanted to start our webinar with with Matias. Hi, Matias. Oh,
Thanks.
oops, I'm starting to play that again. But it also is a great lead-in for the why of talking about race and equity in the classroom. Why should we do it? And I have a series of slides here with 10 reasons. And I hope it's not overwhelming. I wanted to kind of present a whole range of reasons, and starting with community. And I include here a picture of Matias's class to get us off to a start here thinking about community. And I include this picture because it's a lovely picture of his ABE class, and you can see the good feeling there. But we also know from what we've heard from Matias that there were divides between people in this class. And so, you know, when we take on a hard conversation, whether it's about race or anything else, it might surface divisions between us, or barriers, or things that are in the way of us really knowing each other, or things that are in the way of us truly showing ourselves. But in the course of the hard conversation, we get a chance to actually share and show some real part of ourselves. And that creates an opportunity to grow. And that creates community in your classroom. And that makes the classroom more inviting. People are more connected and more accountable. It's important not to take this lightly. Obviously, it's a hard topic. You need to build trust over time. Riva's going to talk more about the how, but just as far as the why is concerned, by bringing up this topic and preparing yourself and doing it well, you can really build community in your classroom. Not only that, but the content is really relevant. Relevant content, we know from the research, drives persistence. It helps people come back to class when they know that they're not just improving their reading and writing skills, but they're reading content that helps them address real issues in their lives. So when a student has a high interest article in front of them, that content can act as scaffolding to more and more complex texts. So the relevant piece is a really important reason for why you can bring this into the classroom. Or as my colleague in the field, Kamala Red, says, race and equity is the elephant in the room. So let me just introduce Kamala Red. She's somebody I've known for years because she's been in touch with the change agent. She always supports her students to submit articles to the change agent. So if you see any writers in the change agent whose bio identifies them as from the Mid-Manhattan Learning Center, you can bet that Kamala Red was the person in the background helping to facilitate the writing process there. She says that she's always talked about race and equity in the classroom, but she says the pandemic has exacerbated racial inequities. And now the process is even more organic. The elephant in the room is even bigger now. So when we talk about the elephant in the room, or rather when we remain silent about the elephant in the room, that's contributing to bias in some way, because we're allowing this thing to exist in our midst without talking about it. It doesn't mean that we need to talk about it all the time, 24/7, every class, every lesson plan, no. But we need to kind of weave into our materials some acknowledgement that this is happening, because our students are living this reality, we're all living this reality, so we need to bring it up. When you talk about race and equity in the classroom, you're also addressing real obstacles that students face. And by addressing it and showing that it's something that can actually be wrestled with, you're modeling that racial inequity isn't an immovable object. It's something that was created by humans and can be shifted by humans. And we can change the learning environment for our students so that it's a place where it's not steeped in bias. And this is going to help our students reach their goals. Also, honestly, talking about the struggle for racial equity and freedom and liberation is inspiring. I'll just use the words of Rose Imelda Quintana, who is also from the El Rio Learning Center in Tucson. She says, talking about race is hard, but it is also inspiring. Black people experienced many abuses in their lives, but they were strong and fought for their rights. They joined forces. They were brave and they fought for their dreams. They inspire me to be strong and brave and to focus on my dreams. So why not bring that into your classroom? You know, those inspiring stories. Or as Kamala said, the conversation isn't always negative. And what she wrote to me was, I have had foreign students who have found the America they encounter is one that is much improved due to the multi-generational efforts of African Americans, some of whom built protest movements, while others worked from within racist environments to agitate for change. These freedom fighters helped pave the way for the benefits available to newer immigrants. So another reason to teach about race and equity is that it teaches key skills. And I have a few slides on the skills that it teaches. You know, in the college and career readiness standards, we learned that it's really important to make sure students can differentiate between fact and opinion. We encourage them to find the evidence for their opinions. So when stereotypes come up, when we're looking at materials that express bias, when our students express opinions, we can ask them, you know, why do you think that? Do you have evidence for that? And we don't only ask that question about when somebody says something we disagree with. We ask that question all the time because we're trying to impart this skill of being able to bring evidence to your argument. And also encouraging people to research and use multiple sources to show where they get their opinions from. Another key skill it teaches is critical thinking. So Kamala says, in the classroom, I make it clear that we all have a right to our opinion, but we also have to be critical thinkers. She's had students say to her, why do Black people commit so much crime? And, you know, that's just a straight up stereotype. And the direction she takes that conversation is to look at the US system of over-policing and the imbalance in our criminal justice system. She gets her students to think about media literacy and what's reported in the media and what's left out. She looks at the educational systems, the employment, the destruction of Black communities, redlining. So she brings in systemic racism and makes it part of the mix as the contradiction to the straight out stereotype. And I have to just read out loud the quote in the second bullet. She says, I bite off pieces and share them like a mother bird, but the informational nourishment is never comprehensive and often seems insufficient. And I put that here because that's so real. You know, we're swamped in biased messages from our culture, from our society, from our economic systems, from our education. And in the classroom, what we can do as teachers is offer these informational, you know, bits and pieces of nourishment, she calls it. But it might not ever feel comprehensive. It's never going to feel like a fix. It might always feel insufficient, but there's value in just staying with it and trying to keep building. Finally, I'm going to say a little bit about these civic standards that come from the Massachusetts English language proficiency standards. These were developed by two world education colleagues of mine, Andy Nash and Jen Vanek, and I share them in some detail here, even though you could say that this is a presenter don't to have this much text on a slide. I do apologize for that. But as I was trying to trim it down, I realized I really just want to keep the language here. I'm not going to read it out loud or anything, but when you get the copy of these slides and you can look at this language and notice that this is now being woven into standards. It's not the first time necessarily this kind of language is appearing in the Massachusetts ELPS. I know that they drew off many other resources to come up with this set of standards. But you're starting to, the fact that we're seeing things like that it's part of the standards to recognize damaging cultural stereotypes, that we want to balance acculturation with preserving one's culture, that we don't want to just recognize our rights, but know how to exercise them, that we want to identify problems and root causes. I mean, there's just so much richness here. And the fact that it's woven into the standards is really important. At the last webinar, I talked a little bit about, as we address bias, we need to look not just at ourselves and improve the ways that bias shows up in ourselves, but we need to set up guardrails and we need to change the water we swim in. And this is a beautiful example of both a guardrail and changing the water we swim in. So as a guardrail, it functions as a way to keep a teacher on track. And that's a beautiful addition to a teacher's toolbox when it comes to addressing equity. And it also starts to change the water we swim in, because it just normalizes these skills as part of being a good teacher and part of creating an adult ed program and classroom that is responsive to the needs of addressing racial equity. So those are some ways that addressing race and equity help you address standards. My 10th and final slide about the why is just simply that it's an ethical choice. In a society where bias is real and pervasive, choosing to address this in the classroom is just simply the right thing to do. If you can, and if you are prepared, and if you're supported. So the important message here is don't go it alone. We all need to bring our trusted friends and allies around us. They help check us. They act like guardrails. You all mentioned some of the people at the beginning of this webinar when you put the names of people that you want to honor in the chat. And we need to keep our close people around us so that we're not trying to do this alone, so that when the discouragement does come up, we have a way to get support and nourishment for continuing. So that was a lot of information out to you all. I want to give you a chance to say a little bit about how you're feeling about some of it. And the way I want to do that is I have these two slides, one with Post-it notes about where you can say something you're excited about, and another where you can say something that you're nervous about. And the way we're going to do this, and this may be a tiny bit chaotic, but bear with us. We're going to drop into the chat the link to a set of Google Slides, and it's only got 2 slides in it. What are you nervous about and what are you excited about? And then what you can do when you get there, and hopefully that's in the chat, it's just a live link, you can click on it, is grab yourself a Post-it note from the side and type into it something you're nervous about, something you're excited about. And hopefully you can self-organize. Maybe about half of you will be on the first slide and about half will be on the second slide. So not everybody's trying to grab Post-it notes from the first slide. And just take a couple minutes to check that out. I'm going to stop sharing and look at the set of Google Slides and see if people have made their way in there. So yes, I see lots and lots of people have made their way into the Google Slides. That's great. So I see some people are grabbing Post-it notes and starting to write in them. That's great. This is going to be many voices from many anonymous animals. Yeah, feel free to adjust the size. Some comments might be overlapping. That's fine. I love seeing this get populated. This is great. Yeah, after you write yours, take some time to read what other people have written. And also we will include these when we send you the slides, so you'll be able to read what people have written. So I see people saying that they're worried about being inappropriate, saying the wrong thing. Yes, thank you for being honest there. Some people feel too nervous about it, being unkind accidentally. Yeah. I hear this a lot. I mean, one thing I think, especially for white teachers, it's good to take your time, go slow, prepare yourself so that you don't make mistakes, but also just know that you will make mistakes in all likelihood. It's only human to make mistakes and prepare yourself. And then more importantly, just prepare yourself to keep going back, even if you make a mistake. You know, you can always apologize, you can always try again. And let me see some of the people talking about what they're excited about to bring to potentially affect change. Yeah. The opportunity to be so much more relevant. And Riva, if you tell me what you're seeing.
Yeah, no, I was just looking at building community through authentic learning and making connections, because that feels really, this is such an issue that is part of everybody's life all the time. And so to connect our classrooms to what's happening outside, and I think is really important and is such a strong way to build really strong relationships, both among students and with students. So I was just noticing that one.
Yeah.
And one that says centering student voices, which is also really, yeah, great.
Yeah, these are great. I mean, it's really fun to see these Post-it notes proliferating. I realize it's hard to read, but we can, we'll probably rearrange these so that they're more legible and then send them out to you all. Really good stuff here. And I like the part about just being excited for yourself as a teacher, you know, to be doing this work, because when we're excited, then, you know, I think we communicate that to our students. Great.
Yeah, and then there's one last comment in the chat also from Vince that I just want to point out that says that I messed up really bad with a jobs class once, but I had built a relationship with the students, so they showed me a lot of grace and we had rapport already. And that is so important for a teacher to be able to do these things.
Yes.
Build those relationships.
Mm-hmm. It's not that you won't make mistakes. It's the part that you need to be able to do is keep coming back, I think. And I think when you've built up that trust and people know that you're there for them, then they're going to be more forgiving.
For sure. So we're going to move on to the second half of this webinar. And it's coming, this very moment is it's an interesting minute right now that that we are in. Someone mentioned in the chat, and Cynthia also mentioned, that the Chauvin verdict is being read, I think, at this moment. And what we're going to be watching as that happens is this interview with one of my students talking about what it was like to talk about race and racism and police brutality in class last year. And a lot of the examples that I'm going to present in this next part about how to talk about race and racism and racial equity in your classes come from last spring, from conversations we had last spring. So that's, yeah, it feels sort of like an interesting, heavy moment, just as we're going to listen to Delsant. So this interview is an interview with one of my students, Delsant Lavoie, who's from Haiti. Both he and his wife were police officers in Haiti, and then came to the United States. And he has been in our program. He was in my class for 1 year, but he's been in our program for almost 3 years in other classes. And what he's going to talk about is just what it was like to learn or to talk about race and racism in the class. So we'll just get that started. Here we go.
As an immigrant, we've experienced racism as well. And this system of racism is not only in the United States, it's all over the world. As I said, even on my country, the first Black Republic, Haiti, we have racism. But here we talk about the US. What we've learned in class help us to deal with this situation. Thanks God. Also, when I worked at the hospital on Jamaica Plain, I remember I faced discrimination. Since the George Floyd death to now, things are still happening, or things have been worse. You can see that on news or on TV or happen. We see that one police officer who pepper or Black folks on US military uniform. And it's unbelievable. I wonder myself, that's America. What happened? I mean, as an immigrant, it helps us to be more careful and learn how to prevent some issues. When you come here and you don't know how to deal with, those situations, you could be a victim because, it's a system, and racism is a part of a system that they, built to, to keep us like Black people, Native American and Spanish, not to move forward. That's my opinion. Racism, it's something like they built against us between last year and this year. We are able to understand, how to explain to our family, our community, how the system works, how you can prevent yourself from being one of the victims of the system. It's the reason why the students want to learn more about this topic, because we live here and would like to see a better country, where our community is safe and feel confident that we live in a safe place without fear and without pain. That's what we expect.
Is there anything hard about talking about racism in the US?
Doesn't matter, if it's hard to talk about this topic, because you know what? Like racism, you have to know that one day it could be your turn, or your wife, your family, or your children, and it could happen in your community. Or member of your family. Even if those images make us scary or sad, like we've seen with Breonna Taylor and Trayvon Martin, it's a kind of scary images, right? Sometimes you said that I don't want to go out and deal with white people. Sometimes you think about that. But you are afraid of white people, you are afraid of white cops, and I would say this is life. You have to deal with everyone, and you have to deal with every kind of situation. You gave us some advice to handle those situations, some laws, how to deal with police officers, and let us know our rights. That was helpful. And don't give up. Don't be discouraged from doing the right thing. Like I used to say to my family and everyone who lives near me, surrounded me, not to resist. When a cops or whatever you call it, police officer, put you over, even though you have right, you have to, make sure that you're doing what they say in a peaceful manner. When you try to fight back, you make things, worse for you in some cases. And I would say as well, like I saw on the TV last year, people protesting around this country. It's a great way to to fight back, but without violence. Without violence. For me, that's the best strategy. To make our voice heard. You understand that? And another thing we could do, even though they have gerrymandering, they have suppression, we have to, go to vote. It's our nuclear weapon with this system. Go to vote. Make your voice heard. Across. Elections.
Okay. Oh, I'm going to start it again by accident. So that was Dalsant Lavoie. And now I'm going to just give everybody a minute or two to reflect on in the chat what struck you about this interview, what felt important, what questions do you have, and how does this interview also help you think about your own students and your own teaching. So I'll just leave that there for a few minutes. And unfortunately, for some reason, Cynthia, I can't see the chat. So if you could read some of those out, that would be helpful.
So, yeah, okay. Yes, there's some really good comments here. While he was speaking, I saw lots of enthusiasm just for, bravo for speaking the truth and being so honest. Somebody says, it's true but sad, as a parent of an African-American young man, I have had to teach my son that he is to do as told, do not resist, it may save your life. His honesty and his reflection about being scared of white people. Yeah, that was a moment where you don't want to leave the house. Yeah, very candid and true. Somebody else asked if they could share this at a staff meeting, share the video at a staff meeting. So the answer to that is yes. This recording will be going out and you can, please feel free to share it. It makes me less afraid to have the conversation because I don't have to do all the talking. Yeah, you can use other people's voices, which is better anyway. There is pain and fear that we carry every day, the burden he carries and his generosity. I felt supported by his statements that it is initially hard for everyone. Yeah. My students were afraid to go outside when Trump was ranting, afraid that they'd be killed because that's what happens in many African countries. Oh, thank you for that, man. Alice says it's necessary to have this conversation because we live here and we want to feel safe and secure where we live. Yeah, that was a good quote from the video. Rachel says, I would love to hear how the class lesson went when you were teaching about the murder of George Floyd.
Well, Rachel, that is a perfect segue. Let's go there. So for the next piece of this webinar is the how to do this in the class, and a lot of my examples come from that time, though not all of them, but we'll get there. We'll get there soon. So how to talk about race and equity in the classroom. So Delsan gave us a little preview of what I want to talk about. He gave the student perspective. I'm going to talk a little from the teacher perspective now. And then first, I want to just reiterate some of the things that have been said so far in this webinar and also in the chat, that conversations that focus on race and equity in general can be really difficult, and you might get pushback from the organizations that you work for, from your students, et cetera. And it can also be really emotionally draining for both students and teachers. So that's just kind of a warning about that. And that it will never feel like enough. I want to really echo what Kamala said in the slide earlier about this work being huge, but often feels insufficient. And that all of that is true, but so that's all the negative stuff out of the way, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. And so here's some tips I want to give you for just how I've done it to try to make this a little bit easier. So we're going to start, actually, speaking of Kamala, we're going to start with one more quote from her, which is, I'm not a teacher expert, I'm a teacher guide. I'm a person who likes to learn, and so I can impart that excitement. My approach is, we're going to learn this together. And I think that is just an important place to start as you're having hard conversations, especially if you're talking about, or in addition to, if you're talking about experiences that might be different from your own experiences, but that we're all kind of learning this together. And that if you're not excited or interested in what you're teaching, and you're not excited or interested in learning about what you're teaching, then it's going to reflect, your students will know. Having just done a very boring lesson for myself, I can tell you, it didn't go well for any of us, but that is also a good learning experience. So first, like Cynthia mentioned earlier, hard conversations can help build community in class, but there needs to be a level of trust already established for them to go well. And that's trust between the teacher and the students, but also trust among the students, which I actually think is the most important part. I want to acknowledge also that I found this whole process much harder, the building community in class, much harder now that all of my students are on Zoom. And it's harder for them to respond directly to each other, often when we're doing large group things, especially with technology barriers. But that said, I would say to build trust in the classroom is key first, to give students a chance to get to know each other outside of the hard conversations, just in general, always kind of bringing in their own lives and their own experiences. To have students set their own ground rules for speaking respectfully about hard conversations, and just in general to invite students to talk about their experiences. And then the most important thing that I have learned is, don't respond, as the teacher, don't respond to everything. Let the students respond to each other. And I think this is especially true for me anyway, if I disagree with something that a student has said, that I want to immediately give them my opinion. And that's not always the best way to build rapport in your classroom. So to sort of let the students respond to each other and throw questions back at them rather than answering them yourself. For me, when I started thinking about addressing issues of race and equity in my classes, it was kind of a mental reframe for what it meant for me to teach English. So I started to think about these issues as survival English for my students. 90% approximately of my students are Black. They're mostly from Haiti. For them, surviving and thriving in the US is not just about going to the grocery store, opening a bank account, doing all of those things, but it's also knowing how to respond if pulled over by the police, or recognizing discrimination that they might be facing at work and knowing what to do about it. So we heard both of these examples from Delcin in the video. In a little while, I'm going to give you access to some of the lesson slideshows that I developed for my classes. And one of those slideshows that you'll have access to is about how to talk to the police if you get pulled over. And we watch videos not only about what to say and practice vocabulary, about what to say, the language part if you get pulled over, but also like what to do with your hands. Keep your hands on the wheel and narrate what you're doing, and don't make any sudden movements. And these things could be a matter of survival for my students, to know how to respond in those situations. And they're kind of an interesting thing, I think, for me to be teaching as a white person. These are not things that I would necessarily have thought of to teach if I had a class of mostly European immigrants, for example, or white European immigrants. But my students tend to live mostly in immigrant communities, and they don't have a lot of access to native-born Black people in their own communities to help them navigate kind of how to do these things. So now now I do it. I also just want to say that to remember that this stuff is everyday English. Issues of race and equity come up in units about health and transportation and community and employment. This slide is just an example of some of the vocabulary that my students learned last year when we were talking about police brutality, actually, and race and racism. You'll see the articles that this vocabulary comes from in one of the slideshows that I'm going to share with you later. So my job is to guide my students to the English that they need to live their best lives here. And if you look at these words, they're actually very common. If any of our students are listening to the news or reading the newspaper, they're going to come across these words, and we'll need them to fully express themselves when they talk about these issues. If ICE comes to their door, they're going to need some of these words to be able to respond to that. And they don't just come from explicit lessons on race. In my employment unit, we discuss the difference between disrespect and discrimination, for example, as important vocabulary. And in a workplace, understanding these differences could really influence how the student responds to what they are experiencing. And I just want to say that these words, though fairly common, are not words that we find in most textbooks. So it takes a little addition, a little teacher addition to get there. And this isn't to say that talking about race has to be its own unit or that you have to do it in every class. Navigating race and racism, equity and inequity is just part of everyday life, like I've said before. In the health unit, you can talk about access to healthcare and mental health, how poverty, racism, sexism, etc. Affect our mental health. In the jobs unit, we talk about job safety, workplace discrimination, and which jobs are higher stress and lower pay and who works at them. And this is an especially relevant conversation right now that we're having during COVID, and who is considered an essential worker and required to go to work in person. And just one example of a sort of a connect to what you already do is that when I teach civics, I have for years used the Oxford Picture Dictionary's page that you see here called Civic Rights and Responsibilities. It's on your slide. It goes over kind of, you know, like some vocabulary and also your rights. So freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, those kinds of things. And so last year when we were doing some of these lessons, I added an article about Black Lives Matter, which is also on your slide. And we talked about what rights the Black Lives Matter movement is relying on according to the article. So the students said, oh, they're relying on freedom of assembly to be able to, you know, do their work, or freedom of speech to be able to do their work. And this really helps the students to see these rights not in the abstract, but in terms of something that's happening right in their communities right now. And some of these topics can be hard to talk about with students, especially in the lower level classes, because they just might not have the vocabulary to have some of these more abstract conversations. This is an example of an activity that I got from a beginning English teacher. Every day she teaches her students a different word to describe their feelings. And then the words the feelings words get more complex as the week goes on. And then she uses these words to talk about anything that she wants to talk about. You could use them to talk about vaccines or current events. It can be used with both words, like how does the reading make you feel, for example, or pictures. How do you feel when you see this picture? How do you think this woman feels? And it's a way to talk about complex things with a limited vocabulary that is appropriate to the student's language level. And I just want to note that this is a picture of Boston's new mayor, our new mayor, which if you've ever seen any pictures of our former mayors, then people may have feelings about about her. So there she is. And I also just want to say that talking about race and issues of racial equity and justice provide context for what your students might already be experiencing. And they can be complicated for for ESOL students, for immigrants, because they don't always have the cultural context for what these things look like in the US. So as Dalsant said, there might be racism everywhere, but in the US, the students have to learn what the system looks like here and then how to respond to it. So his reaction to police brutality was, this is America, what's happening, right? And one of my jobs as a teacher is to answer that question. What is happening here in America? So last June, when my students wanted to talk about George Floyd, I was actually ready because we had already done a unit on race and racism where we talked about systemic racism and police brutality. So when they came into class wanting to talk about what they were seeing on the news and in the streets, we could reference concepts that they already understood and that they had already talked about in class. And this gave them context for what they were seeing. And because I had prepared in advance, I didn't have to come up with something on the fly about something really intense when the students just walked in and were like, okay, this is what we want to talk about. I wasn't like, because we'd already kind of laid groundwork before something, not before something big happened, but in this case, before George Floyd was killed, we'd already laid some groundwork. And I also just want to point out, which especially I think for white teachers, we often default to talking about the negatives of racism only when we start thinking about incorporating issues of race and equity in the classroom. But of course, there are many beautiful stories of culture and resilience and fun that can be used also to talk about these issues. So that's just a little reminder that that talking about race in the classroom isn't always just like, this is so terrible. It's also a story of uplift and beauty and in one's race and cultural identities.
So Riva, on that note, I want to interrupt you for a second because the verdict has just come in and he's been found guilty on all 3 charges. So you were talking about moments of beauty and uplift. This isn't really a moment of beauty or uplift. It's
So
been,
possibly a moment of surprise.
yeah, and a moment of some degree of justice, which we have consistently not had in our criminal justice system for certain people. So I think if we want to pause here for a moment and just let people do a little exhale, I know we're trying to also do this piece of work, but we are living in this country during this historical moment. This is a major historical moment. People can take a second to look at the chat and see people showing their relief and their gratitude that some degree of justice has been reached. Collective deep breath, says Joy Gain. Bonnie Nicholas says it's a moment of justice. Obviously, Mindy says hallelujah. All of us are tracking this, and I'm really grateful to be with this group of people for this moment. Matthew actually says that as well. I cannot imagine a better place for me to be than with you all at this historic moment. Esrelia says, oh, you're speaking to Leah. I'm overwhelmed with myriad feelings. So I'm glad that we can pause and integrate that in. Dalsant was talking about George Floyd. Riva, you've integrated this work into your teaching. All of you, many of you here in this webinar have been integrating this work into your teaching. So we have a collective exhale and a collective embrace of each other as we continue to do this work. So I'm gonna let you continue now.
Yeah, well,
as we take that in.
Yeah, this is actually the perfect slide for this perfectly imperfect moment. And because this slide actually comes from last June, some of the protests in Boston after George Floyd was killed, and I incorporated this image into my teaching last year. So addressing, sorry, I'm having trouble getting back to my script now that we're in this like moment of, but.
Take your time, Riva. You have such amazing content to share and people have been so appreciative of it. So just take your time and we have plenty of time.
So, okay. Whew.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say, so I've been talking a lot about sort of explicitly teaching race and racism, which I do sometimes, but addressing race and racial justice and equity in the classroom doesn't always mean just talking about race or equity explicitly. For me, it means making choices as a teacher about what to teach and how to teach it. And so making choices like, I'm going to teach, where to put your hands if you get pulled over, in addition to teaching the language parts of that, the vocabulary parts of that. So those are choices that I make based on who my students are and what I think they need and what they have said that they need also. So last year, one of my students came to class. We were on Zoom, remote class, having watched the video of George Floyd being killed, and she was having nightmares. She was scared to leave her house. She talked about going back to Haiti, where she might feel safer. And so we did talk about it in class, using, like I said before, some of the foundations that we'd already talked about, and that we talked about earlier in the year. And when we'd finished talking about it explicitly, I showed them this picture. And so, like I said, this is a picture from one of the protests that had happened in Boston last spring. And the photo is from an intersection not far from where me and a lot of my students live. So it was sort of part of their general, like, the landscape of their lives last spring. The third one from the left says, I don't know if you can see it that clearly in the slide, but it says, "We are strong, we are beautiful, and we are excellent." And so after Roland had come to class with just so much fear, and we had done a lot of talking about our feelings and having the students kind of express how they were feeling and what they were learning from the news. And after that, after we talked about it explicitly, we then used this mantra, "We are strong, we are beautiful, we are excellent," at the end of class for the rest of the year, no matter what the content of the lesson was, whether it was about race or not. We use this as kind of a closing breath at the end of every class. It wasn't explicitly about race, but it was what the students needed at the time because of who they were and what they were experiencing. And so, it's doing some of this work is also about addressing racism, not always just about talking about racism, I guess is what I would say. And then the last thing I want to say about the how is to remember to speak from your own experience, but use resources that speak to the experiences of your students. So while I often have more historical and cultural knowledge about the systems at play in this country than my students do, as a white person, as a native speaker, as, a Jewish person, as all of these sort of as my identities, I don't have the same experiences of racism as my students and as my colleagues who might be immigrants and people of color themselves. So because of who I am and where I come from, my experience, for example, my experience of getting a job might be really different from my students' experiences of getting a job. Their experiences are much more like this quote that you see here on the screen. There are things that I don't have to think about. And so while I always tell my students about my experiences with whatever we're talking about, I also try to make it clear that my experience might be different from what their experience is going to be, and to talk about why that is. This is one of the reasons that I use the change agent so much, actually, which is kind of how we got here. How I got here in the first place is because I teach a lot from the change agent. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but it's been invaluable for me to do this work and to work with this content because the articles are written by adult students and speak to a broad array of experiences that are similar to those of my students, whereas I come from a different background than them. And so I work to bring in resources that they can identify with that speak to their experiences, however different those might be from my own. And I think with that, I am going to take a breath and pass this back to Cynthia.
Yeah, good idea to take a breath. That's a lot. This is a really big moment, and I really appreciate how everybody's just kind of staying with us. And some people have signed off because they're overcome by emotion, and that's fair too. So please do what you need to do for yourself right now. Very quickly, because I want to have plenty of time for you to go on the field trip. I just want to mention that the change agent does have diverse voices, diverse student voices, diverse topics, and diverse formats. And although we do spend a lot of energy and time with lifting up student voices in struggle, where they're talking about addressing a problem, addressing racism, addressing something in their community that needs to be fixed, we also just have lots of different people just being human. And that is one of the ways to address bias, is not always to bring out the Black writer talking about racism, but to bring out the Black writer saying, I miss my mother, during the pandemic. Or, and I believe that's one of Riva's students actually.
Yes.
Or in the bottom right corner, a Black writer talking about how endorphins help her with her mental health. And I believe that is one of Kamala Red's students from Mid-Manhattan Learning Center. I didn't even do that on purpose, but so lots of different kinds of content available in PDF format, like you see there. We also have audio versions of articles, and I've shared just.
Can I interrupt you for a second and just remind you to press presentation mode so that we can see it bigger?
Oh yeah, thank you. We have audio versions of articles. And we also have recently started doing our articles in Google Slides. And 3 of these Riva created and generously shared with us. So I want to turn it over to Riva to share how this works and give you all a chance to explore them.
Yep. So if you stop sharing, I will start sharing. I think we've
Yes.
we had a little technical hiccup. There we go. It's a lot of clicking. All right. So, you're going to have links in a minute to 4 of the slideshows that Cynthia and I have created. These 4 all talk explicitly about race for the classroom. There will be a couple more, at least one more is on its way. So stay tuned for that. I'll put this in presentation mode also, so it's easier for you to see. So actually, I'm not going to do that. I changed my mind because I want to show you something else. So this particular one that I just want to give you a little background on is, this one is about Black Lives Matter in particular. It's written, my class is a high intermediate level ESOL class. So it's written for that because it's a lesson that I have done, but it can be adapted for other lessons also. And once you have the links to these, you'll be able to just click file and make a copy. You can copy the entire presentation. And then once you make your own copy, these are copyright free. So feel free to edit them, to use some and not all, to add whatever you need to, and to really adapt it for your own students. So each of these 4 slideshow lessons has lots of different content. A warm up. This one has music from Sweet Honey in the Rock, and a close activity that students can fill in the blank as they're listening, a listening activity. It's got vocabulary, some background and interviews about Black Lives Matter, and then also some reading and some reading activities from the change agent are also in there, and then a closing slide. So I'm gonna actually stop the share now, and we're gonna give you guys about 5 minutes to click on the links that will be dropped into the chat, and to just kind of take a look, choose one of the lessons there and take a look. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to stick them into the chat, and we'll kind of, to just take a couple minutes to look through those.
So I'm gradually putting in, and Ebony too, you'll see some of the links. There's the talking to the police. There's the Black Lives Matter link. There's one on equality versus equity. And so again, you'll be getting these slides. You'll be able to click on these links, but right now in the chat, I think we have 3 of them up there. So you can click on them. These are open and available, as Riva said, for you to adapt. If you don't have a Gmail address, I don't think you can make a copy of it, but you can download it into PowerPoint and adapt it and then upload it however you want to your remote classroom. So take a couple minutes and check it out. I see Jillian saying this looks different from what you were showing us. So Riva, you were showing them the
Black Lives Matter one, but there's 4 in total. So whichever one you click on might be a different lesson.
we tried to put the title with each one. So if you want to look at the one she was sharing, find the Black Lives Matter one.
There's a Black Lives Matter, talking to the police, intro to racism in the US, and equality versus equity.
So Jillian says she's found 3 so far. That's great. Yeah, and when you get the recording of this, you'll get the chat as well. So you don't have to frantically cut and paste everything into a Word doc. And you will get a PDF of the slides, and the links will be live in the PDF. Yeah, Rachel, we didn't get the racism in the US in there yet. So just, we're a little low on time. So just look at the 3 that we posted for now. And yeah, don't forget that you will get all of these links. I know it's sort of a blizzard of links and a blizzard of chats and a lot to keep track of, so.
Here, I can put the introduction one also into.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here
That'd
we
be
go.
great.
Here's the last one.
So if, as people explore, if you want to come back to the chat and let us know what if you know what you notice about these and share any reflections, that would be great.
Yeah, I see a question about, would we have permission to adapt these to different levels? Absolutely. That is adapt away. That's what they're there for.
Yeah. You'll see if you go to the change agent lesson packets tab, and maybe Ebony, if you don't mind popping that into the chat, there's other Google Slides as well. And some of them have student writing in them. And so if it's if it's a piece of student writing, then we don't feel that we have permission to change that, but you can change the way the text is presented on the slide. You can change the images, you can change the activities, you can change anything else you want. So we should start to close. I see lots of comments about appreciating these concrete, practical, actionable ideas. And people are thankful for the excellent resources. We might want to add a Creative Commons license. Good point. Thank you. I didn't think of that. Yes, any feedback you have would be really appreciated. I just want to give a shout out to Ebony, who's on tech support here with us today, but she does a lot of change agent work as well. And she kind of got us started by creating these Google Slides. And one of the things she did was she created a feedback form at the end. So, because we're new to developing this kind of thing, and we would really like your feedback. All right, keep the comments coming. And even after we close the webinar or end our presentation, we will stay here for a few more minutes in case there are questions in the chat or any kind of last minute things that we can address. But to close us out, I want to remind you to come to our 3rd and final webinar on April 27th. That's with Carmen Stewart and myself. And if Megan or Ebony could drop into the chat the registration link, that would be great. And also, we've created an interactive space where you can, if you have the link to this Google Doc, you can suggest. So I encourage you to go into this Google Doc and make suggestions. You know, if you have ideas about how you can address race and racial inequity in your classroom, in your program, and in our field, we would love to kind of get your collective wisdom in there. And you'll also find more ideas because we can't obviously share everything in one webinar. Also, there are some handouts for you. These are links to content that's freely available on the Change Agent website. There is some of our content that you have to pay to get to, an online subscription. It's very, very inexpensive, but you might not have that. So these are links to things that you can get without any kind of online subscription, including the entire Talking About Race issue. All you need to do is go to our top page, fill out a form, and you'll get a PDF plus all the audio, plus all the extras, everything that we have for the Talking About Race issue, which we published 5 years ago, but is unfortunately completely relevant in every way today. And we did some extra fundraising so we could make sure this issue was available to everybody. Finally, we've collected some resources for you. We want you to have as many supports as possible out there because we know the work is hard. So this is a carefully curated list. This isn't just a little bit of everything. This is some of the stuff that we think is best to bring into your practice. So finally, I'll leave you with our email addresses and one last reminder about our final webinar where Carmen Stewart and I are going to be talking about how to address racial inequity in our programs and in the field. So that will be the focus of the last webinar. I want to give a huge appreciation to Riva. Riva, you're just such a pleasure to work with. You're such an amazing resource for all of us. Thank you for sharing your talents and your skills with us here today. Also, thank you to Dalcent and to Matias and to Kamala, everybody and all of you who brought your attention, your presence into this webinar today. And again, acknowledging the historic moment that we are in and just feel pleased that we could share that with you all together. Do you have any closing words, Riva?
Well, yeah, sorry, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, but yeah, I just want to thank everybody for being here. This was a really special way to spend this day. And as usual, check out the Change Agent because Cynthia does a really amazing job curating those articles for us and for our students. And it's really, yeah, it's transformed how I even think about teaching. So that, so yeah, thanks.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. One final shout out to our intrepid tech support folks, Megan Morris and Ebony Van Dross. This is a huge operation, 160 or 170 people here, lots of background work going to make this a success. So we really appreciate all the hands that made this happen. Thank you all so much. This concludes our webinar. We will stay here for a couple minutes to see if there's any questions in the chat. Are you able to see the chat, Riva?
Yeah, now I can see it. For some reason, when I was in presentation mode, I was having trouble seeing it, but.
Yeah, okay. Okay. And we should check the Q&A to see if there's any questions. Will we receive these slides by email? Yes, Rebecca, you will. You'll receive a PDF of the slides and a link to a recording of the webinar. Not going to type that in. Hopefully you got that. Okay. Yes, Rebecca says thank you. Yeah, so that means you heard me. Great, Rebecca. Thanks for asking the question. And Mindy says, I missed what you were saying about webinars to follow. Please include me via email invitation. Sending much love, Mindy. Thank you, Mindy. It's great to see you here. Okay, note to self, we need to send Mindy the link to register for the final webinar. I don't know if there's a way to put that in the chat also, in case there's anybody else who wants it.
On the Sawbase website, I bet we could.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, people are rapidly signing off. Is anybody here waiting for the link to register for the next? Mindy's still here, so I don't know, Megan, if do you have it, Riva? Oh yeah, Riva just popped it in. Okay,
We
great.
all did.
Multiple times it's showing up. Thanks, everybody. Everybody knows how to Google. Probably the link from Megan. I guess, yeah, either one is fine. Some of them have just more paraphernalia. It's totally fine. Yeah. Either Mindy, do you see the link there? Please grab it. And anybody else who wants to register for the third webinar. Okay, let's close it out. Thanks, everybody. Megan, Ebony, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.